All right. So it's about to turn 5 o'clock, so I figure we'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone to this event held by the Society of Civil War Historians Graduate Council, where we'll be talking about the writing process with both of our guests here, Dr. Francis Clarke and Dr. Brandon Byrd. So, we had two people from the council prepare introductions. So, Maddie, if you would like to start with your introduction of Dr. Clarke.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So, I have the privilege of introducing you guys to Dr. Frances Clarke. Dr. Clarke is Associate Professor at University of Sydney in Australia. She received her PhD from Johns Hopkins University in 2002. She was a research associate for the American Historical Association before joining the history department at the University of Sydney, where she teaches classes on the American Civil War and Reconstruction, memory, trauma, history of childhood, and the social, legal, political, and cultural history of 19th century America. Her first book, War Story: Suffering and Sacrifice in the Civil War North, won the Australian Historical Association's biennial Hancock Prize. Dr. Clarke also works with Dr. Rebecca Jo Plant, who is at the University of California, San Diego. In 2015, they published an article in the Journal of American History that examines racial politics of war memory in 1930s America. It won the Berkshire Conference of Women Historians annual article prize, as well as the Association of Black Women Historians Letitia Woods Brown article prize. More recently, Dr. Clarke and Dr. Plant examined underage soldiers during the Civil War, which they first published as an article in the Law and History Review in 2017, winning the Coordinating Council of Women in History's Carol Gold Award. So this led to the publication of their book last year called Of Age: Boy Soldiers and Military Power in the Civil War Era, that won the 2024 Gilder Lehrman Lincoln Prize and the Society for the History of Childhood and Youth's Grace Abbott Book Prize.
All right, thank you, Maddie, for that glowing introduction of Dr. Clarke. And I believe Amari has prepared an introduction for Dr. Byrd.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So I have the honor of introducing Dr. Brandon Byrd. Dr. Brandon R. Byrd is a historian of 19th and 20th century Black intellectual and social history with a special focus on Black internationalism. He's the author of The Black Republic, African Americans and the Fate of Haiti, the co-author of Ideas in Unexpected Places, Reimagining Black Intellectual History, and the author of Haiti for Haitians by Louis-Joseph Janvier. Dr. Byrd's scholarship has appeared in journals such as Slavery and Abolition, the Journal of African American History, the Journal of Haitian Studies, and Diplomatic History, as well as popular outlets including Washington Post, GQ, and Anscape. Support for his research has come from numerous institutions and organizations, including the American Philosophical Society, the W.B. Du Bois Library at UMass Amherst, the Marcus Garvey Foundation, and the Society for Historians of American Foreign Relations. He's currently working on a biography of Benjamin Pap Singleton, which has received recognition and funding from the University of Kansas Libraries and the Biographers International Organization. In addition to his research and teaching, Dr. Byrd is a co-editor of the Black Lives and Liberation series published by Vanderbilt University Press and a co-editor of Modern Intellectual History. A native of North Carolina, Dr. Byrd earned his BA from Davidson College, an MA in History from the College of William and Mary, and a PhD in History from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He lives with his family in Nashville, where he is currently an associate professor of history and African American and diaspora studies at Vanderbilt University.
All right, thank you, Amari. And thank you to both of our guests for being here. So I'll go ahead and kick us off with a question, and then I'll open it up to the floor, and anyone can unmute their mic and ask a question for our guests here. So I'll start with a pretty broad question. So I'd like for each of our guests to describe your writing habits or your routine. Maybe you could also talk a little bit about what does a day look like when you're in the writing process for a book, an article. What does a day look like when you're in the writing process?
Do you have a preference for who goes first?
Yes, sorry. Dr. Clarke, you go ahead and take it first.
Sure. Thank you for those lovely introductions. And thanks everybody for showing up this morning or in your evening. What does my day look like? when I was in grad school, I had this giant sign above my desk that said, let it suck, half an hour and move on, and have faith. And the have faith part of that, this is because I'm a chronic overrider. The have faith part of that is have faith in my own process, which I think is kind of nuts. But I've come to understand that, the human brain is wired in certain ways, and maybe my process is what I need because I'm a fairly high functioning anxious person, to be quite honest. So what I do in my writing process, because I'm always fearful that I'm going to like miss something, some major argument, or so I spend enormous amounts of time reading everything I can find on the topic that I'm looking at. I take notes just in a Word document, and then I go over all of my primary literature before I set out to write anything. And that process can take like 2 or 3 months. And, I'm pulling out and putting bits of primary sources in a giant Word document. I'm very low tech. And, but then when I sit down to write, something about that crazy process that I go through, and everyone I think will have their own different processes. Something about that crazy over, it's to mm, it's to try and get some kind of handle on the vastness that is whatever we're doing. Historians, one of the big problems we face is there's just the volume of what we deal with, the volume of primary source material, the volume of secondary source material. So, when I start out, I just have to feel some kind of mastery over it all. And so I do this crazy thing where I do 100 pages of notes on the secondary, and several hundred pages of notes on the primary. And somehow through that process, my brain is thinking about connections and making, yeah. It's,
Yeah, so first let me reiterate the thanks for having me here, especially Omari for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be joining y'all and talk about process, right? So yeah, on a yeah, it was interesting hearing Dr. Clark talk 'cause I think we got a lot of similarities in our broader process, right? On a day-to-day basis, I need some input before I'm ready to give that output. Um, and so I'm a morning person for various reasons, both out of I guess personality, how I'm wired, but also out of necessity. We could talk more about that. Everybody's got some constraints under which they work under. Whether that's constraints with their job, whether it's constraints with family responsibilities, whether it's constraints with, whatever it is. Some of my constraints is having 3 young kids, so I make sure that I'm up before them. Um, and which could be a little hit or miss, to be honest with you, but I try to make sure I'm up before them to get that input in. And what I mean by that is reading something related to what I'm writing on. Right? And that serves both as um, the sort of the secondary source, just sort of that baseline knowledge that I need, refresher, new information. But it's honestly a lot of when I read it, it's really great work, not just in terms of uh, the analysis, but also in the craft too. So it also serves as inspiration too for, oh yeah, that's great. That's what I want to aspire to. So then once, other things happen, right? To start the day, there's breakfast, there's getting kids off to school. And then when I get back to it, I try to block off at least one block in my block. That's normally about 45 minutes for me. I try to have at least 45 minutes then of the output of the writing of whatever it is uh, that I'm working on at that moment. And what that writing looks like, that can vary. That could be, okay, I'm ready to really churn out, some pages here. right? It could be I'm not quite ready for that. I need to put some more work into. I tend to write very, very detailed outlines that actually look more like what Dr. Clark's describing, just sort of long transcriptions, even just verbatim retranscriptions of things I've already transcribed. And I got to get the wheels churning. So that could be my writing for the day. And that helps me process eventually the interpretation. Right. So what that's long-winded way of saying what that writing is can vary day to day and where I'm at, uh, in the process and what I'm ready to put on the page.
All right, very good. Thank y'all. So yeah, now I want to turn it over. If anyone else, like I said, feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask whatever you would like.
I'll jump in here and thank you so much, Dr. Clarke and Dr. Byrd, for joining us. And thank you so much for folks in the audience to be able to join us on this Friday afternoon or Saturday morning, what have you. But I think I'm super curious and I'm really appreciative of your time. I know that many of us on the grad student council or just in different points in our scholarship, I'm curious about how you approach these big projects, whether it be like a dissertation or a book length project, and how do you approach something that can be daunting, and what's your mindset as you go into writing that?
Slight hysteria. No, just kidding. What's our mindset? I Do you mean like how do you start? Because I'm not sure that you really know the scope of a project yet when you begin, you know, and I totally agree with Dr. Bird that the best way to start the day is by reading exciting works of scholarship. Read the local journal, the journal in your field or whatever, because it kind of, as you said, gets the wheels turning. Starting a really big project, I think, um, I think I tend to start with something that confuses me, like whatever the thing is that I want to understand. I try to ask really basic questions about how things work. So I don't know, the way I started the last project was just being confronted by these sources. And, they were sources about people wanting their underage children back. And I started thinking, well, how does the government actually process letters? Literally like logistics. How does the law work around this? So I'm kind of trying to figure out the workings of things before I dig into a big project. So I think there's a lot of stages before you get to what is it I'm actually what's my project look like? How should it be structured? I think, I start with a lot of kind of, sometimes you've got to teach yourself whole fields. Like when you're asking basic things like how does the law work or how did the government work in this period? How did information move in this period? I'm always asking those sorts of basic questions about how things in that period work. And I think that takes you places. You try to find the answers, and next thing you know, you realize no one has actually talked about that. No one has talked about how law reports actually, who's taking down what's happening in a courtroom, that sort of thing. So just the really basics about how societies work in a given period. The longer I get in my career, the more I find that those basic questions are really important to ask.
Yeah, that's great. For me, the more that I reflect on it and uh, reflect on it not just in this environment, but just in general, and also in reflect on it in relation to the project I'm currently writing on. Uh, I mean, it sounds simple, it sounds superficial, but I think it's true. That the most important thing is just to start. Is it how to start on it? It's really just to start. Because like, where you're gonna end up you may not know, and also the routes that you're gonna have to go on, you may not know. I'll try to ground this, make it less abstract. I saw Dr. Elena Roberts on the call. Phenomenal scholar. When I started this project on Benjamin Singleton, I knew very little about the history of Native peoples in what became Kansas. And that, long story short, that's where he ends up along with many of the other exodusters. Uh, so at the outset, and perhaps in a way that I should have anticipated, I had to do a lot of homework, a lot of reading. When the scholarship of folks who, like Dr. Roberts, are putting the fields of African American and Native American history together. Um, that was a long process, right? And to get there, uh, you know, turning the wheels at the beginning, and that would have delayed that further, and would delay getting to the point where I then had to hit pause and beef up the foundation of where the project needed to go. So yeah, again, back to I began there, just starting. Whether that's uh, with one source that you're confident in, whether it's with the one question that you're confident in rolling with, whether it's with the conversation you have in your head with that one pivotal foundational source that you have in the head. Honestly, the start can be wherever, and even on a more mechanical point, depending on who you are, the start may be the eventual chapter 10, or it may be the introduction. If you're that type of person that's got it all together, that's not me. I can't start with the introduction. Uh, but it could be. It just really, the important thing is get something going. Without the trepidation, I suppose is the point here, that can affect, to be honest, anybody, whether you early career, mid career, late career. Um, that can't be um, a barrier.
Yeah, can I just I know that one of the questions that you were wanting to address on this was writer's block. And just to play off what Dr. Byrd was just talking about, I think there's no such thing as writer's block. What there is fear. Fear that whatever you're going to say, that maybe you don't know enough, fear that you can't, that you're not smart enough, whatever the fear is. And there's a great book called, I think it's Paul Sylvia. Uh, it's called, I think, How to Write a Lot. And the basic point of that book is exploding all those myths around writer's block. And he says the only way to write is to start. The only way through is through. You just sit down instead of setting yourself up for failure and saying, I'm going to write this argument today, I'm going to write 5 paragraphs. You just sit down for however long you have. If it's 45 minutes, if it's 2 hours, you block out your time, and you have to sit there for that period of time. Maybe you sit there and you just write about the things you wish you could write about if you weren't so afraid. Maybe you sit there and you just pick one source and you start analyzing it. Maybe you just bullet point things that you want to work on tomorrow, but you have to sit there every day. And when you do that, because often it takes you 2 or 3 weeks to really, if you've got away from your work, it takes you a few weeks of excruciating pain to get back into it. Let's face it, staring at the blank screen is painful, and that's why we avoid it. That's all that writer's block is. It's avoidance and it's fear. So, how do you get through writer's block? You sit there every day and you gut it out until suddenly one day, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, sometimes it's even quicker, you get excited about your project again and you realize you have something to say. And then the writing starts to flow, and then you don't have to force yourself to sit down every day. But I think it's super important, that message that you just have to do it all the time.
I'll jump in really fast. Thank you both for being here. Um, I'm wondering, how has your writing process changed over time? And also, I'll sort of add on to that, what's a technique or a piece of advice that you got about writing that you tried that just didn't work for you?
Hmm.
Um, I can answer the technique. So as I've moved through my career, I think at the start I was very afraid to move far away from the primary material. I wanted to, and as I've got further along, like to have a more visual sense. So I close my eyes and I imagine, you learn a lot and you can kind of see, you got to get your reader to see. And I think historians are moving, moving towards, we've had a kind of archival turn, and now we've had a really a more narrative turn since, in the 90s when I went through, everybody had to cite every theorist on the, under the sun in their introductions. Well, now you do that in that work in the footnotes, but you want to write good stories. And how do you write a good story? Try to get your reader to see the stuff that you can see. I'm reading this awesome book, Unworthy Republic, at the moment, which is about Indian removal and how he, you know, uh, thinking about how other people write, which is another reason to read good writing. The best way to become a good writer is to read other people's great writing. And the way he starts some chapters is just imagining someone, walking down the street in DC, and he's telling you how the government's working, but he's taking these very dry sources and he's making you see the logistics of what was going on in that moment, and he's doing it in a kind of visual way. So I think that idea that you close your eyes and you think, what did this look like at the time? What do I need to know to be able to really lay out this story in a way that will compel people to want to read it? So, I think that's a technique that I've learned over time.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Uh, yeah, so that's a great question about what hasn't worked. So it's less a technique and more a format, but it's what immediately came to mind. Uh, Tried writing groups and it just wasn't for me. Uh, they incredibly useful and honestly for the writing group I was in. I think it was useful for if not all of everybody else, the vast majority. But yeah, for me, it's the writing alongside others, for whatever reason, was just not a mode that I was comfortable in, and maybe that's because even from the get-go, from the jump, thinking back to grad school, I was even in that context, which tends to lend itself more to the communal. I think a generalization. Even then, I was a pretty solitary writer then as well. Um, yeah, so that's again a format, less a technique. Um, in terms of change over time, yeah, time is the operative word there. With having less time now, I I think my writing, when it's at its best, it's become more efficient and more focused. Uh, whereas, I can think back to an era when, I would have just the day in front of me, right? And I could be a little less disciplined, to be honest. You know, because, it had hours to, work towards, a project, could, have ESPN open on one screen and, and that was fine. I could toggle between more writing projects. Uh, I could be working on, article about topic A and meanwhile working on, the dissertation and even the early stages of the book at the same moment and be on disparate topics. I'll still have some connective tissue, but still disparate topics. And that could work. Like there would be an outcome. There was a publication at the end. And that's just not the case now. For me to have a positive outcome uh, during the process itself, I need to be much more focused. There can't be the tabs open. I got, uh, I got the 30 minutes, I got the 45 minutes, and it's got to be locked in. Um, and it really does, again, for me to have a positive outcome, it really does need to be one project, at that time. So I don't have any more, tabs with two projects going on at a time, right? It's laser focus on that one thing. Um, and that way, uh, I feel, and I also think it's true that I'm able to keep momentum going better even outside of the writing time, uh, because I've got that one thing in mind. So when I have to unplug, um, for the day, uh, I've still got that thing in mind to the extent where, an idea occurs to me, I put it in the notes app, and I know I'm coming back to that thing the next day. It's not that the next day I'm going back to writing. It's that I'm going back to this specific thing, right? So yeah, I think it's become more it has become more time constrained. I think that the process has become more efficient, and it's certainly become more focused over the career.
This is a very interesting difference that is highlighted between us because I couldn't write without a writing group. And when I
Right.
said, that have faith, the sign I had above my desk, it's, it really is how everybody has different kind of, our brains are all wired differently,
Hmm.
and I've come to realize that whatever crazy things I need to do it because of the way my brain is wired. And, you know, you figured out that you don't, that doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
I'm in the same writing group I was in grad school. It's been going 25 years now. We started it and, because I couldn't write a word. I was so
Yeah.
you know, and so even, the writing group said, just give us a paragraph. I could write a paragraph, and they kind of helped me along, and we still do that for each other. We're all Americanists in different fields. One of those people is Rebecca, who I now write with, and I'm very systematic, in the way that I go through stuff. I want to see it all. Rebecca's completely chaotic, and much more intuitive than I am. And so, and I think our collaboration works because we have a deep respect for each other's processes. She knows I have to do my thing. She lets me go, even though I'm often doing something that doesn't seem to have any relationship to our project. And, when she is doing her thing, both of us take a really long time to do our things, but we respect, there's a respect at the basis there. But, I need other people to, I think because I'm always worried that, uh, that I might not have anything to say, that it might not work out. Uh, you know, I'm a first in family kind of. I know I'm making myself sound like a chronically anxious person, but I mean, we might as well admit that we're human beings. Writing is hard, and you know, I've got pretty good at it over 20 years, but that was not an easy process. So, and I think I really needed the support of other people to say, "Oh, that's really interesting, that paragraph that you wrote there," and that allowed me to keep going.
Hmm.
And I think if I could do 45 minutes a day, I feel like I need at least 3 hours. Um, but anyway, I don't have three kids waiting in the wings for my attention, so maybe that's another big difference between myself and Dr. Bird.
I would love to jump in here and talk a little bit about like academic writing. So I think that academic writing a lot, often means writing for argument. And so my question is, how do you balance focusing on the argument and the methodology, but also making history interesting that reaches beyond just the academic scholarship, but also to the general public?
Do you want to start that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So cards on the table. I'm somebody that absolutely loves narrative history. Right? It's just rich vignettes and that exactly what Dr. Clarke was saying about Unworthy Republic, like the ability to make what can be pretty mundane and dry sources come to life. That's what I really love, and to be honest, why I got into this profession. Right, it was you know that type of scholarship, that type of work. Uh, so for me, that's always the ideal, right? And I will say for me also, these things are, I like how, uh, you put them not in opposition to each other. Sorry, whoever asked the question, I didn't catch your name. I apologize for that. But you didn't put them in opposition to each other. And in, am in complete agreement that they don't have to be. Uh, that there's no reason why, a book with a you know incredible attention to craft and style and prose also can't have an incredibly airtight and persuasive argument that weaves through it. Why would those things be at odds? Uh, to the meat of the question, how to go about that, that's the $1 million question, right? That's what uh that's that's what, to be honest here, that's what I'm striving for, especially with the genre I'm writing in now in biography. Um, yeah, so how to do that? It goes back to, I think, what we've been saying, sort of throughout this conversation. I think it's absolutely true. Is that there's no reinvention of the wheel, that there's no um, you know, genius that is inventing things out of thin air. Uh, that is both what you're putting out and also what you're getting in and what you're taking away from others. Whether it's people, in your writing group, whether it's things that you're assigning for your courses and using that teaching to help inspire the research. It's the secondary sources that you're reading as the foundation. For me, it's also the literature that I read, novels, and I will read everything that Marlon James puts out. I read everything that N.K. Jemisin puts out. Uh, and of course, they're not writing for argument, but I mean, they're writing better than anybody out there. So it helps in that regard. So for me, that's a long-winded way of saying, uh, how to get to that ideal that you're pointing out, how to uh, produce scholarship that's both rigorous and also compelling. And for me, also compelling, not because, oh, I want this to be mass marketed, which is, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just not, I can't speak to that because I got to be honest, I haven't, written anything that's been mass marketed. Uh, um, but compelling because it deserves to be compelling, right? Again, trying to make that more concrete, the biography I'm writing, the guy is, dude, anybody that's has come across Benjamin Pap Singleton in passing, may know, like, this is a fascinating guy. So it needs to be compelling to do him justice, right? So to produce something that's rigorous and compelling, for me, I got to look at models. I need to see how others have done it. Um, and in that regard, I think the historian, and I promise I'm ending here, the historian needs to be no different than, the artist, whether it's a music artist, visual artist, than an athlete who, if they're going to reach their apex, they got models too, right? They say they study. They say this is how they've done it, right? And this is how I'm going to get it done.
I love that analogy to, I mean, history is part art and part sort of social science, right? And I think, I mean, I'm always working with the primary and the secondary at the same time, and you can't make an argument into a void. There's no point, right? So we're always arguing with the way the field has developed. The more you know your field, the more you keep in touch with it. And this is why, much like Dr. Bird, I start every day reading someone else's work, and it makes me feel in touch with conversations that are going on, right? And to make arguments that matter, we're always, the um scholarship is a giant web, and you've got to figure out, like, where in that web, who are the people I'm having a conversation with. They might be not in your field. I read a lot of stuff that's not in American history, for interest, but also because I think people in, who are writing about, like, from doing history of childhood, I might read someone in Sweden or someone in Russia or whatever, because they ask different questions, and that those questions then inform, American history. I think particularly Civil War history, the field is so vast that you spend all your time within that field. And the first thing I noticed, frankly, as an outsider coming to the field of Civil War history, from many other, and from a different country, was, wow, these people only speak to each other. They're not really reading the stuff on civil wars. And I mean, we are now, but back then when I started, 25 odd years ago, it was much more insular. And I think, you know, I think to we've moved now in transnational directions and all the rest of it. But I think it's only good if you try and keep in touch with the conversations in your field, but you also uh, try and maybe read as much, whether it's fiction, whether it's because it inspires you, right? So, I start my writing day every day with, an hour of pleasure reading, I call it. I don't take notes, or maybe I have a commonplace book, where I just jot down, like things that really interested me. And, I watch a lot of documentaries. I just try to get ideas from many places. And, in doing that, uh, you're sort of thinking broadly about, the way other people might approach a given topic. So I'm always reading both secondary and primary sort of at the same time. I don't know if that helps at all, but
Hey, so I was gonna ask real quick, any other names that you guys could throw out of like people to read, especially historians? Because yeah, like coming from philosophy, like I'm used to like horrible technical writing, and that's one thing I like about history is that spans the entire continuum of good to bad writers. But I guess like more technical question that I have is like, how do you start to structure your outlines and your notes for writing? Like right now, like I'm trying to use keywords for ideas that I sort of use as tags, and so I can look them up and stuff like that. But I didn't know if you guys had any methods for doing stuff like that, because that would be really helpful for, at least getting started on projects. Thank you.
do you mean how do you structure your notes and your note taking so that you can find things
Yeah,
again?
like so you can use it for like you later use. Like the problem I have a lot of times is I can't find anything. Like I'll take a note on something and then trying to find it is always a pain. And I just happen to remember it. So I'll try to remember a word. And so then I'll try to look up that word. Or I just didn't know if you guys have any techniques for that, for going from notes to outlines, then to like the actual page itself.
Do you want to start, Dr. Bird?
Just look it up on through your word search, your Control F for the keyword in your vast corpus of note taking.
I mean, I'm so low tech, because when I was in grad school, I started this giant database of, to try and track every tiny thing. And they changed the database and I lost everything. So from thenceforth, I'm like, I'm just going to use a Word document. So I started, for every project, research diary number one. And for the last book, I had like 6 research diaries, all their 100 pages. Everything I read, secondary sources on that project, went into one of those diaries. Just literally this book and then the next book and then this article. And, so I never lost anything because it's always in the same Word document. And for primary sources, I use Zotero. Do you guys know Zotero? A
Yeah.
terrific, free source. You can capture primary sources in it. You can keyword them yourself. You can download newspaper articles or whatever, and you can write notes inside Zotero. And then you can you can call up different keywords. And so, I might have chapter one. Every source that I'm using for chapter one is in Zotero. But I use a lot of Dropbox because I'm, swapping things with another person. Uh, and, as I said, every chapter that I wrote for my dissertation, and actually I still do this, I have another Word document, which is 1.1, and it's just, I start with the topic and I put everything on that topic under 1.1, and then I just gradually make another, the document ends up being 200 pages long, 1.1.2, and it's this variation on that topic, and then number two, and it's just, I'm gathering things. And as I say, I think this is something about my brain and my need to kind of feel like I'm on top of things. I actually end up throwing the 200-page document away and then just writing because it served its purpose. And the purpose is to help me somehow gain control over the enormous amount of material that I don't recommend this. My point is more that I thought initially I'm a terrible historian. And actually, what I've learned over the years is no, that's just what I need to do. And you will all have your own various variations on that you've kind of figured out how to control. And it's okay. Whatever the process is you have, it's probably what you need to do. I don't know if that answered any question at all, but
No, it's good. It's good. I've got a question. Um, how do you let's assume for argument's sake that you want to balance rigor and good storytelling. I find often that I'm trying to tell not only a story, but a story under the story. And so the story is the narrative, and the story under the story is in the notes. And do you find that how do you decide what goes into the narrative versus what you keep in the notes to tell a kind of a connected story among the notes? Does this factor into your thinking at all? And how do you handle it if you have any ideas about that? Stump the panel.
I mean, it depends who your audience is and what kind of book you're writing. So,
Yeah.
a more popular book, and it depends, uh, I had certain ways of writing that were very argument driven. Each chapter had a self-contained argument, and the last publishers said, no, take that out. They didn't want, they want certain things now. They want more narrative driven history books. But I set out to on my last project to write a popular book, and it's the least popular book now. It uh turned into all kinds of things that had never been anticipated. So I'm not sure that, and I figured there was too much technical stuff to explain what we'd found. It couldn't be a popular book. I guess I could write that now, but yeah, I think it does depend on who you're writing for. And I think it depends for a dissertation, you have to have some of that architecture. I will argue you've got to have that in the thesis itself for the committee. But when you go to publish your thesis, they'll ask you to strip a lot of that stuff out. It's just the way. And one of the other questions was, who do we read? Who is some great examples of this? People who really do that beautiful balancing. Um, read the Pulitzer Prize. Kate Mercer's Until Justice Be Done. What a beautiful, magisterial book, right? And it's both argument driven, a beautiful, important argument, but also it's just telling the most incredible stories. I just read Fergus Bowderwich, a book on it's on Congress during the Civil War, and it's non-argument driven at all, right? It's all he's just taking you through what happened in Congress. Two very different books. So I don't know, there's not one way to write history. There's many ways.
I have a question. This might be more specifically for Dr. Clarke, but I'm a historian that writes on memory a lot. So, is there any way that historical memory is different from writing a different type of history? And I wanted to know if you had any tips on just writing about historical memory in general.
Ooh. So what kind of memory are you writing about? Like, what's your study on?
I'm actually the odd one here. I do Holocaust memory. So,
Um, well, what a field. Like, it's a giant field, Holocaust memory. And I would read all the stuff about trauma and, all the new literature on the way trauma has informed memory. And it's its own absolutely gigantic field, the history of memory. I did a field list on memory, it was big. So, when I was in grad school. Um, what can I ask just to you to talk a little bit more about what's driving your question? Is there a concern behind it, or is it just a general question about what we might say about memory?
yeah, it's just a general question. I'm a first year graduate student, so I just didn't know if you had any tips or any suggestions.
I love the American system where you create a giant field reading list and you think, because it's a really good way to ground you in the different conversations. So you think, there's all kinds of different sorts of memory studies, and just try and get a handle on, where they're coming from. Um, you know, Not just in Holocaust studies, but look at the Journal of Memory Studies, or whatever it's called, that starts in the 90s. Read some of that early literature on, and don't read other people reading about it. Read the original studies, because you will bring your own stuff to. This is another thing I've learned the older I get. It's like most people don't go back to original sources. They just read other people reading about the originals. It's a really bad strategy. It doesn't actually take you very long to look at the original, whether it's Locke or whatever. And it can you can see things other people haven't seen. So, you know,
So true.
so I would create your own, reading list, and then don't think about it as I did. I nearly sent myself crazy reading cover to cover. And someone, a lovely person I was in grad school with said, that's not the way that you read, Frances. You get like 20 books together and you spend all day with those 20 books and you just think, how do these books talk to each other? What are they using? What kinds of concerns, how has that field moved through time? I mean, that's what you sort of learning to do as a grad student, right? And because you can't do it any other way. There's just too much stuff. Right.
I had a question for Dr. Byrd that was partially a follow-up to something you said earlier. So you noted that biographies are sort of their own genre. And so I was wondering, since you're working on one, how do you decide whether an individual is biography worthy, and what sort of, new challenges do you find working on a biography instead of other monographs?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll tackle the last part first. The biggest challenge that I face, and it's not unique to the genre, but I think it is a challenge that can be more acute in the genre, and that's the question, I guess, to part of this conversation about what to either leave on the cutting room floor or what to put in the footnotes, et cetera. Um, and why I think it becomes more acute, getting to know somebody in the way that I think you need to write a good biography really entails, knowing all the minutia, of their life. And when and the I don't think I'm, exceptional in this regard. When you get to know that minutia, you sort of think it's all important. You're like, well, this helped make them who they were, and this made them who they were too, and this person, helped make them who they, it's all important. Uh, but ultimately, it's not all, important capital I, enough to go into the book. And I guess more importantly, also the conversation about marrying narrative with argument. It's not all going to help propel the argument forward, which the life story does need to be. The biography needs to be the argument in a lot of ways. So it's not all going to propel that forward, and some of it may bring it to a halting stop. So really trying to figure out, when to make those decisions. That's, an ongoing challenge. I suppose, related to that, another part has been, and this is, I guess, related to your first question too. The figure that I'm writing on right now, in his own day, he's pretty prominent, in his own day, pretty, widely covered, pretty well known. Um, Less so now. Folks are still familiar with, like Nell Irvin Painter's, phenomenal work on the Exodusters, where he figures in that. But in a lot of ways, he's sort of fallen off the radar, even in 19th century African American history. Um, so, and I should say, the other part of that conversation, some of it has to do with, the sources for large parts of his life are relatively thin. Um, so, uh, to me, that doesn't, obviously, I made the decision to, write a biography of him, so that didn't put him off the table as a subject for biography. In fact, that made him a more compelling, figure to me. Um, but it did also lead to, in relation to the conversation about challenges, how to fill in, uh, those gaps. And by gaps, I mean that they're really important ones. Like he's somebody who's born in slavery, and that history of enslavement matters a great deal for how we understand the politics for which he becomes known later in his career, and immigration is politics, and politics is self-determination, et cetera. Uh, so to write a biography, you really do have to, you can't just sort of, let that sit there. Even in, where they can't be filled in, you got to comment on the silences. So the challenge is, of how to do that, to work with uh, in some places, a thin evidentiary base. Yeah, and for that, I've taken uh, various attempts to, try to work with that, from, pulling on threads as far as I can where, that evidence, does exist, to really trying to draw on, historians, and also, folks from outside of history, Black studies scholar, literary scholars, from, Marissa Fuentes to Sadia Hartman, who have, obviously, written at length on this and showcase, how we can, bring a little creativity, and imagine, um, where, the empirical may not necessarily suffice. So yeah.
All right, I have a question. I wanted to ask how or how you go about the revision process, and maybe also how you get feedback on your writing.
Um, I'm in a bunch of different writing groups. They kind of forced us into writing groups on my campus. But I'm in the one that I've been in since grad school. We meet every couple of months on Zoom, obviously, and we swap chapters. And I'm in another one, just with colleagues at work. So getting a lot of input from other people, I find really crucial. Maybe that's not for you, but it's definitely helped me. How do I restructure things? I'm terrible at that. That's why I work with other people, because it's not one of my it's not one of my great skills. I feel like maybe my process negates the, you if you kind of um, written and overwritten things too much, then it makes you a bit precious about it and you don't want to rewrite it. And I think actually it's better to imagine that, my half an hour and move on, just get it down and see that so you can see the whole and then think, how should this whole, if there's everything's going to have an overarching argument, well, how should that work? Or what's the best way to tell, to create that argument? Um, I don't know that there's any silver bullet when it comes to restructuring things, but I think uh, not being not holding too close to the sentences that you've written. If you sit there and all day and you spend an hour and a half or 2 days writing 4 sentences, as I often have, then you don't want to give them up. And that's probably not good. So, nowadays I try really, really hard to just get more stuff down, more. And then you can go back and craft it. And the recrafting is a really delightful process because everything's getting better, so much better. So I find a lot of input with people who are better at structure than I am. I work with someone who I think is exceptionally good at structure, Rebecca. I don't think it's necessarily one of my skills. On the subject of writing biography, um, you know, I think that's the hardest genre of history to write in, actually, surprisingly. But yeah, I think see how other people have structured things. Get a bunch of different biographies. Isabella Morales, Happy Dreams of Liberty, not exactly a biography, but just a beautiful, brilliant study of lives, intersecting lives, and look at how they, other people have structured books. So yeah, biography is really hard. There's been a lot of over in Australia, we had all these seminars and books on how to write biographies 10 years ago. So again, reading outside your field, like, other people have dealt with those questions that you're looking at. Yeah.
I have a good concluding, maybe not concluding question, but how do you write a good conclusion that isn't just a summary of everything else that you just wrote and isn't like, I'm done, let me get 3 sentences and move on to the next thing? Or maybe you do that, right? So conclusions are always tricky and I never want to do them.
Yeah. Conclusions are what you leave your reader with. It's the most important part of whatever you're writing, sadly, because it is the point where you're most exhausted and you're like, oh, I've already said all this. There's so many different ways, circle back to the vignette that you started the book with, gesture towards stuff that needs to be done, talk about the longer term implications um, of the thing that you've just done. The old, they used to say, don't ever put anything in the conclusion that you haven't talked about in the text. Well, that's nonsense. Like, remind the reader in just big, broad terms why this really matters, why this story that you've told really matters. Move away from the things that you've already said and, try and do some more big picture thinking, I think, and acknowledge that the reader has actually forgotten most of most of what you've said. So, they need something to hold on to at the end. Give them some really meaty stuff to hold on to, whether that's future possibilities, the big story that you've told, whether it's, I don't know. Yeah.
I like the way you expressed that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the thing, as well put as you can put it.
I always tell students, don't say in conclusion. No, they all do it anyway. Um, yeah.
All right, well, that is perfect timing. We're right at 5:59. So since we're scheduled for an hour, we'll go ahead and end it there. So I want to once again thank both of our guests, Dr. Clarke and Dr. Byrd. Thank you both again for this very informative session. And just as a closing thought, this will be uploaded on the SCWH YouTube channel. So if someone couldn't make it, please feel free to share this with them. But thank you all for coming, and thank you especially to our guests.
Total pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great weekend.